Senator Lankford, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, glad to.
So we want to just dive right in and talk to you about the post-Roe world. It's been almost a year since the Dobbs decision came down and Roe was overturned. Can you share your thoughts with us on what our country looks like now without Roe?
Yeah, I would say America's still open for business, and all the folks that are avid pro-choice, pro-abortion folks are out there thought the whole world would end if children lived. And what we're finding is that there are people that are actually talking about the value of every child. The conversation's still out there. Obviously, there's still abortion in America that's happening all over the country. Some states like mine have stepped in and said, hey, we actually value every single child. Every child is valuable, and we think every child is worthy of life. Other states are actually promoting abortion tourism, saying, come to our state, we'll help pay the way for you to have an abortion. Just crazy stuff on it. And so we're in the middle of a national dialogue right now. And a year into it, it's still not a resolved issue. Some people said, if the Roe is overturned, then abortion ends the next day. Well, everyone finds out that's not true. This is still a heart issue. It's still a life issue. And it's still something that people need to be able to have continual dialogue to say, okay, where are we as Americans, as individuals, and as a nation? What do we think about children? Are they disposable or are they valuable? Well, I'm on the valuable side. And some people are still in the conversation about it. So let's keep the dialogue going.
You've said previously that you would love to see abortion be unthinkable.
Yeah.
Not everyone thinks this way. What do you think of Republican lawmakers, especially, who are not trying to make abortion unthinkable?
So there's a big difference in illegal and unthinkable. And that's what we tend to get caught up in a lot of the political conversations. Everybody's working on making it illegal. Mm-hmm. And if it's illegal in one state, people can move to a different state or they travel across the state. There's a big difference because abortion is really a heart issue of an individual. There's a child that's alive there. There's no difference between a child in the womb and a child outside the womb other than time. There's just no difference there. They're growing, they're developing, their DNA is different. That child in the womb has 10 fingers and 10 toes and sucks their thumb and feels pain and all of those things in the womb, just like they do outside the womb. And so for me, part of the conversation about abortion really is about, okay, let's talk about this baby. And everybody's talking about choice and preferences and everything else. I'm like, time out. Let's talk about this baby first. What's going to happen with this baby? And to me, that's part of the unthinkable part. I want people to hear the heartbeat. I want them to think about their future. I want them to sit at a mall somewhere or a fast food restaurant and look at a baby in a stroller and go, that's what that child looks like inside me right now. And they're just smaller at this point. And so as people have to think about that, they begin to think about the value of every single child. And I think that's a good thing. The illegal part is where we have the big political fights. Mm-hmm. The unthinkable part is really the heart issue and trying to be able to process, this is not tissue. This is not a lump of cells. This is not an inconvenience. This is not a medical procedure. This is a child. And okay, what about this child? What are we going to do here?
What would you propose to do on a federal level or state by state?
So a couple of things. Number one is we've got to actually talk about this issue. For some reason, there's some conservatives and Republicans and others that are so terrified to be able to talk about abortion, they've just backed off on it, like, hey, state issue, not my issue on it. And it's going to go away on that point. It doesn't just go away. There's a lot of people that are angry because these children are inconvenient for them, and they're adamant to say, we want to take out children that are inconvenient. We want to get rid of them. Well, we should walk into that conversation and to say, hey, I think children are valuable. If you think they're disposable, let's talk about that, and let's actually engage in that dialogue to be able to talk about what happens next. So step number one, keep talking about it. Don't just back off and say, done, hands are washed, court's done their thing, I'm over. Let's keep talking about it, because that's moving from illegal to unthinkable. That's actually getting down to the hard issues. Second thing is we do have to talk about it on state levels and on national levels. Where are the parameters? Europe, a long time ago, actually determined that when a child feels pain in the early days of a child's development, they don't do that. There's hardly any countries in Europe that do late-term abortions. California is doing late-term abortions today. California right now, a child that is hours before delivery, they're taking out in an abortion. Okay, that's unthinkable for me personally to be able to process the inhumanity of that. So we have to think about as a nation, what are we going to do about that? Where are our parameters? We as a nation determined a long time ago, we don't do partial birth abortions, for instance, where a child is mostly delivered except for their head, and they literally kill that child while they're mostly delivered. We determined as a nation that's horrific. We're not going to do that. We've still got conversations to happen nationally to say, what are the boundaries for every state, while every state is still determining their boundaries. Florida's going to have one set, Oklahoma's got another, Alabama's going to have another one, New York State and California are going to have another. That's going to be a fight that's going to happen all over the country. So there's really multiple layers. The hard issues, the national issues, what are national parameters, and then what are the state parameters?
And when you spoke, people who are kind of shying away from talking about this at the national level, it made me think of a lot of pro-lifers are worried after former President Donald Trump suggested that Florida's heartbeat bill was too harsh. What do you think of this comment? And do you think that we should be able to trust that President Trump cares about the unborn?
Yeah, well, he was President Trump was a very pro-life president as president. But I think there are several people on the national stage, President Trump included, that's all kind of looking at, okay, what are the polling numbers and where's everything else? When you start to make a decision about, is a child valuable, that's not a political decision, it's a moral decision. And you've got to determine, what are my moral, ethical beliefs here? That's one set of issues. And then you start looking at politically what's possible. Because culturally, I understand a lot of people in culture don't agree with me. They think children are disposable. Some children I like and some children I don't like. I get rid of those I don't like and I keep those that I do. I just don't agree with that moral perspective on that. But I'm still winning culture over to it. So there's also a parameter that I challenge everyone who's running for president, everyone who's engaged, whether it's a city council, a local state house or Senate race or a national race, to be able to talk about, what do you believe? What's the art of the possible? How do we save as many children as possible? So that's a political conversation. Where is culture moving that we can get the maximum amount of votes to be able to do that? But whatever we're going to do, we should be focused in on having a culture of life as a country, that we value every single person, whether it is a senior adult in a very vulnerable moment or a child in the womb in a very vulnerable moment. We value life.
And so what kind of restrictions would you like to see? Or not restrictions, but perhaps what kind of safeguards would you like to see for the unborn?
Yeah, so there's parameters that are out there that we've got to be able to talk about. What are those parameters for life on it? Some of those are already in law right now. In law right now, you cannot mail by law anything that's actually gives an abortion, creates an abortion in life. That's in federal law right now. The Biden administration has basically said to every state, ignore that law. I know it's in federal law. Number one, the Attorney General is saying, I'm not going to enforce it. The White House has said, hey, we're not even sure this is a real law, but you can all read it. It's actually in the statute right now. And so they're basically saying, prosecutor discretion, we're not going to enforce that. Okay, well, that's an issue to be able to talk about. Okay, what's going to happen with the enforcement of existing law? Second issue is, what are we going to do to advance different laws? And as I mentioned before, every state's going to have this dialogue, and that culture in that state's going to have to determine what's our value of the life of every individual. What is an individual's value in our state? And they're going to have those individual laws, and every state's going to actually discuss that, figure out where they are, have a vote, and then have that determination. Nationally, we're going to do that as well. We've also got individual bills that we can continue to be able to move to be able to speak out. For instance, if a child has Down syndrome, should they be able to be aborted just because they have Down syndrome? If there's a girl in the womb and they wanted a boy, should they be able to abort them just because it's a girl and say, we're going to get rid of all the girls, but I want to have a son. And so I'm going to keep aborting girls until I have a boy. Is that okay in America? Is that where we are? Is that kind of selection of killing some children because they're girls and keeping some because they're boys? Are we okay with that? So all that dialogue is a part of not only a legal conversation, but a cultural conversation as well. Let's have it. Let's actually have the honest dialogue and move from just screaming and yelling at each other to really trying to engage in the policy issues and the moral issues that we should talk about.
Now, the Biden administration, like you were saying, they support very extreme positions on abortion, but it's very hard to actually pin them down on what they support, where they stand in these cases. Why do you think that is, and how do you think Republicans like yourself can get them to be more specific on where they stand?
So the Biden administration, without a doubt, the most pro-abortion president in American history, far and away. No one's been more active at proposing and promoting abortion in America more than Joe Biden. He wants more children to be taken out in the womb. I mean, he's active on that, and he does everything he can. Why do I say that? Because no one has ever created abortion at VA clinics, pay for travel if you're in the military. We'll pay for you to be able to go to another state and get an abortion. Please go get an abortion. We'll pay for your trip to be able to go do that. I mean, that's just beyond my belief that he's doing that. In my state, in Oklahoma, we don't allow an abortion in my state. We value all children in our state, but we think it's a reasonable position to say kids are valuable. The Biden administration has stepped in and said, if you won't put a 1-800 number on your information in your state saying, if you can't get an abortion in Oklahoma, call this number, we'll tell you where you can go get an abortion, they're literally remove federal funds from our state. So our state has lost, my state has lost federal funding because we won't promote abortion and where people can go in another state. This president is trying to find new ways to tell moms, here's where to go take the life of your child. And I just can't even process how that fits into the psyche of an individual and of an administration. But they're finding every way they possibly can to increase the number of abortions in America. They don't want to see those numbers go down. We don't know exactly a number, but we think just in the past year, about 200,000 children in America are alive today that would not have been alive before the Dobbs decision. 200,000 children are alive. They'll be in preschool in 2 years. They'll be in kindergarten in 4 years. Those kids will be in classrooms with other kids. They're alive today because of the Dobbs decision. And the Biden administration is mad about that. They're upset that those children are going to go to preschool, into kindergarten, and graduate from high school. I can't process that. And so for me personally, there are a lot of issues that I talk about with other people on the other side of the aisle. And I say, well, I understand your perspective on this particular policy or that one or energy or whatever it may be. And I go, I don't agree, but I can understand it. This one I don't understand. They're mad those kids are going to be in a kindergarten.
I remember last year, I believe Nancy Pelosi said in a press conference, something along the lines of lamenting that 200,000 women or something like that had not been able to get an abortion.
Yeah.
But
that's 200,000 children that are going to be born.
Right.
That's what she's actually lamenting.
So unthinkable. And along those same lines of what you're talking about the Biden administration, we've seen over 200 attacks on pro-life pregnancy centers and Catholic churches combined since the Dobbs leak. And then we've seen this kind of targeting of pro-lifers like Mark Houck, different pro-life activists who've been praying outside abortion clinics. What do you think of the DOJ's posture and the Biden administration's posture post-Dobbs?
Yeah, so the administration is, again, trying to find every way they can to increase the number of abortions. And part of that is intimidating people that are pro-life activists and that are speaking out in that area, to be able to intimidate them like they did for parents that were speaking out at school board meetings. They're going to turn out DOJ folks to be able to show out and start keeping track of parents that speak out in school board meetings. They're doing the same thing to pro-life advocates out there to try to intimidate people into silence, which is not going to work. They believe in the value of every child. They're going to continue to speak out for the value of children. But they're also basically turning away when a pro-life center is attacked, to say, no, that's not relevant. That was just graffiti. That was just a rock in the window. That's not really a hate crime. But if you were to go to another place and say, I'm going to pray on the sidewalk in front of an abortion clinic, well, that could be a hate crime. They're trying to find ways to be able to silence those folks. Again, this goes back to basic policies of a president who's finding new ways to be able to increase the number of abortions in America, rather than saying, what are we going to do to represent all citizens in all places, even the youngest?
And the last question for you, because we don't want to take up too much of your time, something that I've been hearing from pro-life groups on the ground and these different advocacy groups that they're concerned about is that these pro-abortion groups are pouring a ton of money into state-level initiatives or, campaigns, ad campaigns, and then they're coming out very strongly to support each other. How do pro-life Americans and people like yourself combat these state-level efforts to change red states to blue states on abortion?
Yeah, the pro-abortion folks are spending a lot of money right now on different state referendums, carefully worded state questions, trying to be able to push legislators to pour a lot of money into elections. That is within their right to do. They're Americans. They have a point of view. They have a political right to do that. But we also have a political right and responsibility to be able to speak out, to be active in these areas, to be able to find ways to be able to assist, to volunteer, to support whatever it may be, those folks that are actually supporting a pro-life message, to say, hey, you understand you don't like children, they bug you? We do. We like kids. And so we want to engage in that dialogue on it. Right? And so we should keep that dialogue going. We should support them. We should volunteer. We should be engaged in pro-life centers. We should be engaged in pregnancy resource centers and volunteering, finding ways to support them. Do all those things. Those are all positive things. Again, that is within our right to be able to also do. But we should also be keenly aware. They're being very strategic on the other side to say, we're going to find ways to be able to press on this. state questions and all those things. I encourage state legislatures to be wise in how they're writing legislation and what they're doing. There's some in state legislatures right now that are actively pushing, well, we're going to push murder charges on women. And I'm like, well, hold on, time out. We speak out for the life of every child, but we also have compassion for moms in this as well, that they're making really difficult decisions on this and often pushed in other areas. That doesn't mean they don't have consequences and issues in their own personal life and all this that they carry for a very long time. But for some in the pro-life community, in my community on it, we can become overly harsh as well and to be able to engage. So we have a responsibility to lead with compassion because we're compassionate about children, but I'm also compassionate about moms as well. I know full well that mom who had an abortion 10 years from now is going to be sitting somewhere in some restaurant and she's going to look over and see a 10-year-old child sitting there with her mom and think that's how old my child would have been right now. I have great compassion for that woman. She's going to live with that consequence of that decision her whole life. So we should live with that kind of compassion for people to say, hey, I'm not angry at you. I'm not yelling at you. I don't persuade anyone by yelling them down. No one persuades me by angrily yelling at me. That's not how it really works in real life. Let's walk through life with people. Let's help them think about things that they may have never thought about before. I'm amazed at the number of people that I just sit down and talk to that have, when I ask them a simple question, when is a child a child? That they've literally never thought about it. It never crossed their mind, that basic question, when is a child a child? And they sit back and they'll say, I don't know, never thought about it. And I'll say, well, okay, is it like an hour before birth it's a child? And they'll almost always go, oh no, it's way before that. I'll go, okay, well, how early is it? When is a child a child? Let's talk about this. That's a child in the womb that we can all accept as a child. When is that moment? I believe that child's a child at conception. And I think science does too. That's when they have unique DNA that's different than the mom's DNA, different than the dad's DNA. That's a unique person that's there that's developing. That's what I think it is. But I think science also backs that up as well. And I'll just engage with people, say, when do you think that is? Okay, well then what's the consequences of that decision? Let's talk about it. Let's take the politics out of it and put people and children back into the conversation. And let's actually engage in a compassionate, loving way, both with moms and for the value of every child.
Love and compassion. That's beautiful.
Crazy concept to actually have compassion for people, but I think it's right.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Lankford. We really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us.
You bet. Glad to visit with you today.